Dr. Havas, are there any significant developments in research that have occurred since your October 19 supplemental rebuttal testimony? And if so, would you just very briefly advise the board and others here of that research?
Yes, the NTP study that we've been talking about, they released their final report on rats in November 1st. So that's since my previous testimony. And that was, their conclusion included a peer review process. So the study has been peer reviewed and it's now available in its final format. And they concluded that there were two types of tumors in male rats that were caused by cell phone radiation at 900 megahertz, the same frequency that's used in the smart meter. The second bit of information that's new since my previous testimony was a study in the United Kingdom where they looked at the incidence of brain tumors, and they found that there was an increase in one type of brain tumor. It's a glioma, very similar to what other epidemiological studies have shown, the same tumor that they found in male rats, and the increase is only found in the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe. So it's where you end up using your cell phone. So the incidence in the UK is now going up for that type of tumor in those two areas, but it's stable or going down for other types of tumors.
Thank you.
What's a glioblastoma?
A glioblastoma is a severe form of a glioma. It's a very highly malignant glioma. And that's the glioblastoma was the one that was found in the study that I just mentioned, the increased incidence in humans in the frontal and temporal lobe.
Those were glioblastomas.
That was a glioblastoma.
And the glioblastoma is the tumor that caused the death of Senator McCain, Senator Kennedy, and Beau Biden.
That's correct.
What was the megahertz number used in the NTP study?
900 as well. So the rats were exposed to radiation at 900 megahertz, which is the same frequency that's being proposed for the smart meters.
Could you compare the health effects of analog meters, digital meters, and smart meters?
Yes, an analog meter is a very simple motor, and it doesn't produce any dirty electricity, and it doesn't radiate radio frequencies at all. An RF meter, my understanding is that it produces dirty power on electrical wires in a home, but it doesn't radiate radio frequency radiation. And a smart meter produces both dirty electricity and radio frequency radiation, so it transmits it through the air to a receiver.
If an apartment building has a number of meters, does that increase the exposure to for an individual in that apartment building?
Definitely.
Could you describe how that would work?
Well, each smart meter would ping every, whatever the frequency range is. That ping goes through the air in all directions. It's generally non-directional. And anyone within the range of that ping, their body would be exposed to the radiation to whatever degree. The further away they are from it, the lower the intensity. The closer they are, the higher the intensity. The more pings your body gets, the more disturbed it becomes at the frequencies that we're talking about.
So that an individual living in the proximity of more than 1 meter would receive more pings, so to speak.
Correct. If you're close, a smart meter has to interact with an antenna, and whatever that distance is, anyone within that distance is going to be affected by that. The meter can actually go beyond the antenna, but at least within that distance, you would be exposed.
And that would be multiplied by the number of meters that were on the side of the apartment building, let's
Correct.
say. Does that work also if there are meters in a community of houses?
Yes.
Explain how that would work.
Well, if you have neighbors next to each other, once again, they're each pinging at different durations or different intensities or different frequencies, and every time there's a ping, you would be potentially exposed to that. Remember, they're both producing dirty electricity as well, which is something that hasn't really been covered from a health perspective so far, and that dirty electricity travels along wires. And if you're using the same transformer, you share that dirty power.
And so if a meter is pinging 7 times in a household, but there are 10 houses within 10 miles, they all might be pinging at the same time as far as the individual is concerned.
I probably wouldn't go to a 10-mile limit. I think that's probably too far, but certainly within 300 to 500 meters, I would be concerned.
Is there a difference between biological response to electromagnetic energy that is intermittent compared with the same kind of energy that is continuous?
Yes. When they first started doing research in this area, they found that when they exposed people or animals, mostly animals, to continuous waves, they weren't nearly as harmful as intermittent or pulsed radiation. And scientists were trying to figure out why that was. They couldn't figure it out, and there's two potential reasons for it. One is when you have continuous radiation, the maximum, so you've got something that's changing a little bit, but it's pretty continuous, the maximum and the average values are really close to each other. When you're dealing with pulsed radiation, you end up having a peak and then nothing, and a peak and then nothing. If you average those, you're in here, and if you take a maximum, you're up here. So in some cases, you're comparing apples and oranges if you look at averages. That's why it's so important to look at maximum value. So that's one of the reasons that some of the early studies might have found that pulsed radiation is more biologically active than continuous wave. The other thing that we've recognized is that because it's not a thermal effect, we find that humans and any kind of living organism, they're electromagnetic. So all of our nervous system is electromagnetic. And our cells are communicating with each other electromagnetically. That's been shown. There's no controversy about that. If you interfere with that communication by putting out a frequency that's interpreted by your body to represent some activity, then that's going to affect your body. Or if you send out a frequency that interferes with cells communicating with each other, that's going to have a biological effect as well. So the real concern, in a sense, the paradigm shift when it comes to electromagnetic energy is that it's a form of communication, electromagnetic communication. It's disrupting that communication within your body and hence having deleterious effects.
So that one pulse could cause problems if it interacted with an individual.
One pulse could cause problems. I'd be less concerned with one pulse a day, obviously. But the more pulses they are, the more concern there is. And that's why it was so important to get a sense of how many pulses these meters provide. But remember, that's RF. There's still a continuous dirty electricity element to that. So while you might be exposed to 7 pulses, if the information is accurate, you're exposed to dirty electricity 24/7. And those are multiple pulses.
Could you begin by describing dirty electricity, just a very short statement?
Okay. Clean electricity in North America has a frequency of 60 cycles, and it's a sine wave, which means it's just a smooth wave like this. Dirty electricity is the same sine wave, but it has high frequencies. It has radio frequencies superimposed on the sine wave. So if you looked at it on an oscilloscope, it would look like this. And every time there's a spike, it has a potential effect to sensitive electronic equipment. That's why you often plug things into a surge suppressor. So a surge suppressor gets rid of some of the high spikes that you may have. And in areas where there's a lot of dirty electricity, you would find that your light bulbs are burning out, or you have to replace your dishwasher more frequently because it's being adversely affected by the radiation, by the spikes on the electrical wire.
How does that dirty electricity enter the human body?
Well, dirty electricity, it's at a slightly different frequency that we're talking about for the 900 megahertz. It's in the kilohertz range, which means it's thousands of times per second that it's vibrating, as opposed to millions of times per second with megahertz. And because it's a radio frequency, it radiates from the wall. So the closer you are to your wall and the inside wiring, the higher the intensity of the radio frequency. And you can set up meters, and they will measure how much is coming out of the wall. And so basically that's affecting your body just like the higher frequencies would affect your body. And one of the things we found is when the frequency goes above 2,000 cycles per second, it no longer flows around your body, it begins to go internal to your body. So what we're really concerned about are frequencies between 2,000 and 100,000, roughly slightly higher cycles per second. That's the frequency range that we know is biologically harmful.
How does the dirty electricity affect the cells when it goes into the body?
We've done some studies with people, and I'm not a cellular biologist, so I don't look at cells. I do look at cells under the microscope, but more from a human perspective. And we found that people who are exposed to dirty electricity have problems with their blood. One of the things we're finding is that if you take a pinprick and you put your blood under a microscope, you should have nice round blood cells that are floating around, sort of not connected to each other. One of the things we're finding with dirty electricity is the blood cells are sticking together, so they're no longer free floating, and they're beginning to stick together in columns. And because of that, what the job of a red blood cell is to bring oxygen to the body and get rid of waste products. So they do that through the surface area. So the less surface area there is, the less they can perform that function. And so people who are electrically hypersensitive can have, for lack of a technical term, clodgy blood, where they have really viscous blood that is just not flowing properly. So the circulation gets impaired, and then there's all sorts of secondary problems that can develop from that. The other thing we're finding with dirty electricity is we've worked with diabetics, and we find it increases blood sugar. And now this is a really serious problem because such a large population are coming down with diabetes. And we find that it affects some percentage of the diabetic population. We don't know what it is. And it includes both type 1 and type 2 diabetics.
Community is contains a large number of smart meters that you've been describing. Would somebody who travels through that community on daily activities receive more exposure to this kind of potential health problem?
If you can visually imagine, the answer is yes. If you could visually imagine what's going on, you'd have light bulbs coming on and off, like blinking for short periods of time, but you'd have multiple blinks and slightly different frequencies, slightly different colors. And a person walking through that would then be exposed every time there's a blink, there's a transmission sent, if they're within a certain distance of that smart meter.